A political titan stood handcuffed, surrounded by heavily armed officers as flashing cameras captured every second. Outside, a crowd of chanting supporters demanded answers, their voices echoing through the terminal. Julius Malema, one of South Africa's most controversial and polarizing political figures, was being led away by law enforcement at Tambo International Airport. The arrest sent immediate shockwaves across the country, igniting intense debate about the intersection of politics, law, and public trust in a nation still grappling with deep historical wounds. The dramatic scene unfolded just hours after Malema returned from a Pan-African conference abroad. As he emerged into a rival's terminal, security personnel, flanked by armed police, moved in with precision. Witnesses described a tense standoff lasting nearly 20 minutes as Malema's legal team, already alerted to the impending arrest, rushed to the airport. Smartphone videos spread rapidly online showing Malema addressing journalists and supporters with defiance, insisting that no intimidation would ever silence the message of the economic freedom fighters. What struck many observers was not only the arrest itself, but how deliberately public it was. Authorities could have acted discreetly, yet instead chose one of the country's busiest airports, ensuring maximum visibility. The arrest warrant issued earlier that day by a Johannesburg magistrate related to speeches Malema had delivered during recent protests. Prosecutors alleged that his rhetoric amounted to incitement, claiming it encouraged illegal land occupations and unrest directed at foreign-known businesses accused of exploiting South African workers. Almost immediately, critics questioned whether this was genuine law enforcement or political theater designed to intimidate both Malema and his supporters. The optics alone raised uncomfortable questions about motive, timing, and intent. To understand why this moment resonated so deeply, it is essential to understand who Julius Malema is and what he represents. Born in 1981 in a township near Polokwane, he rose from poverty to become one of the most influential and disruptive voices in post-apartheid South African politics. He first gained prominence through the African National Congress Youth League, eventually becoming its president and cultivating a reputation as a fearless advocate for radical economic transformation. His uncompromising calls for land expropriation without compensation and the nationalization of strategic industries earned him both fervent support among the poor and deep hostility from established economic interests. After his expulsion from the ANC in 2012, Malema founded the Economic Freedom Fighters, a political movement blending Marxist-Leninist and Pan-Africanist ideology. Within a short period, the party emerged as the third largest political force in the country. Malema's signature red beret and military-style attire became powerful symbols for a generation of young, unemployed South Africans disillusioned with what they saw as the failures of the post-apartheid settlement. His rallies drew tens of thousands, and his speeches regularly went viral, giving voice to anger over inequality, land dispossession, and broken promises. The charges against Malema focused squarely on speech. Prosecutors argue that his language during protests crossed a legal line, encouraging violence and disorder. Central to the case is reliance on the Regulation of Gatherings Act legislation rooted in apartheid-era attempts to suppress dissent. Legal scholars were quick to note the irony of using a law once deployed against anti-apartheid activists to prosecute someone who claims to be continuing that struggle. The state must prove that Malema's words created an immediate and real danger, not merely that they were provocative or controversial. Malema's defense maintains that his speeches were metaphorical, consistent with a long tradition of revolutionary rhetoric intended to mobilize political action rather than incite literal violence. His legal team has challenged the constitutionality of applying this outdated law to modern political discourse, arguing that it violates protections for freedom of expression enshrined in South Africa's constitution. At the heart of the case lies a question the courts have never fully resolved. Where does fiery political speech end and criminal incitement begin? Another layer of complexity arises from parliamentary privilege. As a sitting member of the National Assembly, Malema enjoys immunity for statements made within Parliament. However, the speeches cited in the charges were delivered at public rallies, placing him in a legal gray zone. President suggests this protection is narrowly defined. Previous attempts by political figures, including former President Jacob Zuma, to broaden parliamentary privilege have been rejected by the courts. Malema's lawyers argue that engaging with constituents and organizing politically are inseparable from legislative duties and should enjoy similar protection. A rejection of this argument could have far-reaching implications, potentially exposing elected officials to prosecution for routine political campaigning. Within hours of the arrest, the economic freedom fighters demonstrated their organizational, visibly strength. Party leaders condemned the arrest as a desperate act by a fearful regime and announced nationwide protests, including plans for a mass march on the Union buildings. Members of Parliament disrupted proceedings, some being forcibly removed, transforming legislative defiance into another public spectacle. On social media, the party's messaging machine moved at full speed, driving hashtags to trend globally and framing the arrest as part of a broader crackdown on progressive African movements. An emergency legal fund raised millions of rand in a single day, suggesting careful preparation for such a confrontation. The country quickly polarized in townships and informal settlements. Many saw the arrest as proof that the system remains stacked against those demanding genuine economic justice. Comparisons were drawn to the apartheid silencing of figures like Steve Biko and Nelson Mandela. In contrast, many middle-class South Africans, business leaders, and opposition politicians welcomed the arrest, arguing that no leader should be above the law or free to use incendiary language without consequence. International observers noted a clear divide along economic lines, with those benefiting from the current system emphasizing stability and accountability, while the marginalized viewed Malema as a suppressed champion. The arrest revived painful historical memories. Under apartheid, arrests were routinely used to neutralize political opposition. Even after 1994, politically charged prosecutions have often been met with skepticism about underlying motives. What makes this case distinctive is its focus almost entirely on speech, reviving fears that the law itself can be weaponized to suppress political dissent. The Constitutional Court now faces a pivotal test, as Malema's lawyers argue that prosecuting political speech violates constitutional guarantees and that the law being used is outdated and incompatible with democratic norms. South Africa's constitution robustly protects freedom of expression while acknowledging limits where speech directly threatens safety or infringes on the rights of others. Political speech traditionally enjoys the highest level of protection. Yet the boundary between rhetoric and incitement remains blurred. International human rights standards further complicate matters, emphasizing that restrictions on political speech must be strictly necessary and proportionate. Timing adds another layer of intrigue. The arrest comes just 18 months before national elections, at a moment when the ruling ANC is losing support and the EF continues to gain traction, particularly among younger voters with no lived memory of apartheid. Polls suggest the party could significantly increase its parliamentary presence, giving Malema substantial leverage. Some analysts believe the arrest could strengthen his martyr narrative, while others argue it may temporarily hinder his ability to campaign. Malema's history suggests resilience. Over the years, he has faced numerous legal challenges, from hate speech convictions to corruption allegations, many of which were eventually dropped. Each confrontation with the law has tended to increase his visibility and deepen loyalty among supporters. The current case once again tests whether legal adversity will weaken or strengthen his political standing. Several possible outcomes dominate public speculation. The conviction and imprisonment could elevate Malema to martyr status, testing whether the EFF can maintain momentum without his physical presence. An acquit or withdrawal of charges would validate claims of political persecution, likely boosting his popularity. A prolonged legal limbo could allow him to remain politically active while continuously mobilizing support as a symbol of resistance. Each scenario presents distinct challenges for South Africa's democratic institutions. Reactions from other political parties have revealed deeper strategic divides. The Democratic Alliance has emphasized the rule of law while expressing concern about political suppression. The Freedom Front Plus has openly supported the prosecution, citing property rights and public order. Left-leaning movements and smaller parties have largely expressed solidarity with Malema, framing the issue as one of civil liberties rather than personality. The arrest has forced every political actor to clarify where they stand when stability and freedom appear to clash. Social media has amplified every aspect of the drama. Platforms such as X, Instagram, TikTok, and WhatsApp have become battlegrounds for narrative control, protest coordination, and international solidarity. Messages of support have emerged from movements across the globe, framing Malema's arrest as part of a wider pattern of suppressing youth-led economic justice movements. At the same time, critics warned that online mobilization risks escalating tensions further. Beyond legal arguments, the arrest has reignited debate about South Africa's economic model itself. With unemployment hovering around 30%, wealth concentrated among a small elite, and land ownership still deeply unequal, Malema's calls for redistribution resonate strongly with millions. Business leaders warn of capital flight and economic instability. While supporters argue that the existing system has already failed the majority, his legal troubles and economic platform have become inseparable, each reinforcing the other in the public imagination. Youth mobilization has been particularly striking. Many under 35, previously disengaged from formal politics, are now registering to vote, organizing protests, and occupying campuses. Across the continent, youth movements are closely watching South Africa, viewing these events as part of a broader generational struggle over power and opportunity. Legal scholars caution that subjective interpretations of incitement could enable selective prosecution, chilling activism across the political spectrum. South Africa now finds itself at a crossroads. Citizens are asking whether institutions exist to serve justice or to protect entrenched power. Supporters and critics alike confront fundamental questions about democracy, accountability, and the limits of dissent. International attention underscores the stakes as South Africa's democratic experiment remains a reference point for much of the global South. Whatever the courts ultimately decide, the arrest has already reshaped the political landscape. It has intensified debates about land, wealth, and representation that the country can no longer postpone. While the judiciary will determine Malema's immediate fate, the political earthquake triggered by his arrest will continue to reverberate through South African society for years, perhaps decades, regardless of any legal verdict.